Can a man who once ran from danger ever find the courage to stand again? Stay with this story. Because what began as the quiet night of a broken soldier, haunted by shame, turned into a moment that tested everything and left everyone who witnessed it speechless. The cafe was nearly empty. The kind of place where the hum of the refrigerator and the faint squeak of a ceiling fan filled the silence more than conversation ever could. Michael sat alone in the corner booth, his back against the wall, as he always chose. He had a clear line of sight to the entrance, the register, and every table. Old habits didn't die. They lingered, like ghosts he couldn't shake. A steaming mug of black coffee sat untouched before him. His hands rested on either side of it, though he hadn't lifted it once. His eyes were fixed on the dark liquid, seeing something that wasn't there. Something far away. In his mind, the cafe blurred into a desert, the air thick with sand and heat, the silence broken by gunfire that still rang in his ears even years later. He blinked hard and shifted in his seat, but the memories never left. They clung to him like a second skin. To the rest of the world, Michael was just another tired man in a worn-out jacket, the kind of man who faded into the background without effort. No one guessed that behind his stillness lived a storm. No one saw the shame carved into him as deep as old scars. Once, he had been a soldier. Once, he had carried men's lives in his hands. And once, when it mattered most, he had failed them. The bell over the cafe door jingled, pulling him out of the fog of memory. A young woman stepped inside, brushing rain from her coat. Behind her came two children, a girl of about 7, clutching a backpack to her chest, and a younger boy, maybe 4, holding her free hand tightly. The woman guided them to a table by the window. Their laughter, soft but real, floated across the cafe, cutting through Michael's gloom like a shaft of light. He looked away quickly. Families had become painful to watch. He remembered faces, men who had families of their own faces. He had abandoned in the worst moment of his life. He forced himself to focus on the table in front of him, but the sound of the children's chatter tugged at him like a reminder of something he'd lost. The waitress brought menus to the family, her cheerfulness genuine. The kids argued over pancakes or waffles. Their mother smiled, tired but warm. Michael let the sound wash over him like a distant melody, a tune he didn't belong to anymore. Then the door opened again. This time, the air shifted. 2 men walked in. Michael noticed immediately, his body did before his mind did. Their eyes scanned the room, not for tables but for exits. One wore a hooded sweatshirt despite the weather, the other a heavy jacket. Their hands didn't swing freely at their sides but hovered near their waists. Michael knew the signs. His chest tightened. He looked around the cafe. The waitress didn't notice. She offered them a smile. The family by the window was laughing at something the boy had said. No one else felt the shift. Only Michael. The men split slightly, one hanging back near the door, the other moving toward the counter. The waitress's smile faltered as he pulled something from his jacket. It wasn't money. The cold steel of a gun caught the dim light. "Everyone down!" the man barked, his voice sharp, rehearsed. The room froze for half a second, then panic erupted. A chair screeched across the floor. Someone gasped. The little boy by the window began to cry. Michael's muscles locked, his vision tunneled. He had been here before, different place, different enemies, same fear. The memory slammed into him, men shouting, gunfire rattling, the decision to duck instead of charge. The decision that had haunted him every night since. He felt his breath catch in his throat. The man with the gun pointed it at the cashier. "Open the register, now!" he shouted. The other man at the door scanned the room, his hand tapping against his own weapon, daring anyone to move. Michael stayed frozen in the booth. His heart pounded against his ribs. He could feel the blood draining from his face, the weight of his own cowardice pressing down like a stone. He told himself, "Don't move. Don't get involved. You're not that man anymore." But then he saw them, the family by the window. The mother's arms stretched protectively across her children as she pulled them close. The boy's tears streaked down his cheeks as he buried his face into her side. The girl's wide eyes flicked around the cafe, searching for someone, anyone, to make her feel safe. And for a fleeting second, her eyes landed on Michael. He felt it like a jolt of electricity. She didn't know him. She didn't know his past, his shame, or the moments he wished he could rewrite. All she knew in that instant spread into something worse, before one of them pulled the trigger just to prove a point. His gaze flicked back toward the family by the window. The little girl's eyes still hadn't left him. Wide, trembling, but fixed. Trusting, pleading, Michael inhaled slowly. His heart thundered, but his mind cleared. Fear was still there. It always would be, but for once, it didn't paralyze him. It sharpened him. "Hey," Michael said suddenly, his voice louder, directed at the robber by the counter. It cut through the tension like a blade. The man whipped his head toward him, fury in his eyes. "What did you say?" The robber snarled, stepping away from the register just enough to break his stance. "I said," Michael repeated, his tone even, measured, "You don't want to do this." A laugh erupted from the man by the door. It wasn't a real laugh, it was jagged, ugly, covering nerves. "Oh, he's one of those heroes," he sneered. "Sit down, old man. Before I—" But Michael didn't let him finish. "You think this ends well for you? Look around. You've already shown your face. You've already threatened a witness. You're not walking out of here free, but you still get to choose if you walk out alive." The words weren't empty bravado. Michael's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen endings, who had watched men make choices they couldn't take back. And in that instant, both gunmen faltered. Not much, but enough for a shift. The cashier let out a choked sob as she shoved the drawer open, the clatter of coins spilling across the counter. The man at the register swore and swept the bills into his jacket, his movements jerky now, sloppy. Michael's hands stayed visible on the table. His posture was steady. He wasn't reaching. He wasn't lunging. But he wasn't backing down either. He leaned forward just slightly, his eyes locked on the gunman by the counter. "Take the money. Leave. Nobody has to get hurt." For a moment, it looked like it might work. The man's grip on the gun loosened, his attention flicking toward the cash stuffed in his jacket pocket. But then the boy by the window whimpered again, louder this time. "Mommy, I'm scared." His small voice shattered the fragile balance. The robber at the door spun toward the family, raising his weapon. "Shut him up!" he shouted. His tone wasn't controlled anymore, it was frantic, on edge. The mother clutched her children tighter, tears in her eyes as she whispered frantically for them to stay quiet. Michael's pulse spiked. His vision tunneled on the gun, now pointed toward the children. His body moved before his brain could argue. He rose from the booth in a single, fluid motion, his hand gripping the heavy ceramic coffee mug from the table. With a sharp twist of his arm, he hurled it across the room. It struck the robber's wrist with a sickening crack. The gun clattered to the floor as the man screamed, clutching his arm. Chaos exploded. The boy cried out. The girl shrieked. The mother screamed. The waitress ducked behind the counter. The second robber turned, eyes wide with rage, swinging his gun toward Michael now. But Michael was already moving, instincts taking over where fear once ruled. He lunged across the narrow aisle, slamming into the man's chest with the force of years of training buried beneath guilt. They crashed into a table, sending dishes shattering across the floor. The gun skidded out of reach, clattering beneath a chair. Michael grappled with the man, his muscles burning, every nerve alive with the fight. For the first time in years, he wasn't frozen. He wasn't running. He was exactly where he needed to be between danger and the people who needed protecting. The man roared, swinging a fist into Michael's ribs. Pain exploded through his side, but he didn't let go. He gritted his teeth, twisted, and drove his elbow into the robber's jaw. The man's head snapped back, dazed. Michael pressed forward, pinning him against the floor with the weight of his body. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temple. Around him, the cafe was a storm of panic and noise, but in his mind, everything was silent, razor sharp. The other gunman sending plates flying. But his eyes burned with the kind of fury that didn't surrender easily. The cafe was a war zone now, tables overturned, dishes shattered, terrified cries bouncing off the walls. The waitress cowered behind the counter, whispering prayers under her breath. The mother shielded her children, her wide eyes darting between the men and the weapon in Michael's hand. The man pinned beneath Michael scrambled free in the chaos, coughing and clutching at his ribs. He staggered upright, his partner joining him, and together they glared at Michael with the kind of hate that came from desperation. Two men, cornered, ready to lash out like animals. Michael steadied the gun, both hands wrapped tight around the grip. His stance widened, his chest heaved, but his aim was solid. He could hear his own heartbeat, louder than the rain, pounding the windows. "Don't," he said, his voice low but carrying. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. For a moment, the robbers froze. Reading him, they saw something in his eyes, not the trembling fear of a civilian caught in the wrong place, but the steady fire of a man who had seen combat, who had faced death and carried its weight in his chest. The injured one sneered, spit dripping from his lip. "You don't have the guts," he hissed. "Men like you never do." The words cut deeper than the robber could know. They pierced the very wound that had never healed. Michael's jaw clenched. His finger hovered against the trigger, but the tremor that ran through him wasn't fear, it was memory. Images flooded him. Brothers lost. The choice not made. The weight of silence afterward. He had lived every day since under the shadow of that cowardice. Now, standing between two armed criminals and a family of strangers, the question roared in his chest, "Will you fail again?" He took a step forward, steadying the gun. "Try me," Michael said, each word sharp as steel. The robbers faltered. The one with the injured wrist shifted, his bravado flickering. They weren't trained soldiers, they were men who relied on fear, on control. But the control was slipping. They saw in Michael's stance something that terrified them more than the weapon itself. Conviction. Behind him, the little girl whispered, "Don't stop," as though she believed he was the only thing keeping them safe. The words hit Michael harder than any fist. They weren't a plea, they were trust. And trust was something he hadn't felt in years, not from comrades, not from himself. The two men exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Rage, uncertainty, the weight of a decision. One wrong move, and everything would shatter. Michael's arms trembled under the weight of the gun, but his voice stayed steady. "Take the money and go. Or stay and see how far you get. Your choice." The silence stretched, thick with tension. The rain outside pounded harder, as if the world itself held its breath. The mother clutched her children, eyes locked on Michael. The waitress peeked over the counter, hope flickering in her tear-streaked face. For the first time in years, Michael wasn't paralyzed by fear. He was driving it, and deep inside, he realized something. The past didn't have to own him anymore. The cafe felt like it was holding its breath, the air charged with something sharp and dangerous. The rain outside hammered against the windows, thunder rumbling low in the distance. Michael stood in the center of it all, the gun steady in his grip, his chest rising and falling with measured control, his eyes locked on the two men across from him, their desperation radiating like heat. The injured robber clutched his swollen wrist against his chest, his other hand twitching with restless anger. "He's bluffing," he spat to his partner, his voice thick with pain and bravado. "He won't do it." The other man shifted uneasily, sweat slicking his brow despite the cool air. His gaze flicked from Michael to the terrified family in the corner, then to the register. The little girl sobbing, her voice breaking. "Please don't hurt us." It was the same voice he had heard in his head for years, the voices of men begging for help while he had hidden, paralyzed. But this wasn't memory. This was now. Michael's body reacted before thought could catch up. He kicked the fallen table hard, sending it crashing into the gunman's knees. The man stumbled, the shot going wild, tearing another hole in the cafe wall. Michael surged forward, tackling him, the two crashing into the counter with bone-jarring force. The gun skittered across the floor, landing near the register. Michael slammed the man's wrist against the edge of the counter until he dropped it completely, howling in pain. Breathless, Michael pressed the muzzle of his own gun against the man's chest. His voice was steady, unyielding. "It's over." The injured robber scrambled back, eyes wild, holding his broken wrist close as if it might shield him. The other man, pinned against the counter, froze under Michael's glare. For the first time since the robbery began, they looked less like predators and more like prey. The silence afterward was deafening. Only the sound of the children's sobs filled the air, soft and trembling. Michael's chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temple. He looked at the family. The mother's eyes met his, wide with shock, gratitude, and something else, something unspoken. As if she understood this wasn't just about saving them. Michael tightened his grip on the gun for one last second before he made his choice. He lowered it. "On the ground," he ordered. His voice carried no room for argument. "Both of you. Now." "Don't." The two men hesitated, then slowly lowered themselves. Michael exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. His hands trembled, but not with fear, with release. For the first time since the desert, he had acted. He had stood between danger and the innocent, and he hadn't frozen. The storm outside roared louder. But inside the cafe, a fragile calm began to return. The room was still vibrating with the echo of gunfire when silence finally pressed down like a heavy blanket. The two robbers lay on the floor, breathing hard, subdued not by handcuffs but by the sheer authority of a man who had decided not to run this time. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he kept the gun trained on them, his breath ragged, his shirt clinging to his chest with sweat. The mother was the first to move. She pulled her children closer, rocking them gently as though to erase the terror that had carved itself into their young faces. "It's okay," she whispered, though her own voice shook. "It's over now. It's okay." Her words seemed aimed as much at herself as at them. Michael lowered the weapon, just enough to signal that the threat was under control, but he didn't holster it. His eyes flicked to the shattered glass across the floor, the bullet holes scarring the cafe's walls, the overturned tables and spilled food that testified to the chaos of moments before. It all felt too real, too close, as if the war he had tried to forget had come roaring back in a storm of violence. A faint ringing filled his ears, not just from the gunfire but from memory. Other gunshots, other cries, a desert sun beating down on sand. He shook his head, forcing himself back into the present. Not then. Not there. Here. The waitress peeked out from behind the counter, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. I called the police," she stammered. Michael nodded once, his voice low but steady. "Good. Keep everyone inside until they arrive." The robbers groaned. One of them spat onto the floor, his defiance not entirely broken. "You'll pay for this," he hissed, his eyes blazing with hatred. But there was no strength behind the words anymore. Michael crouched beside him, his expression hard, not cruel but unyielding. "I already paid," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Years of it. And tonight, I stop running tabs." The man blinked, confused by the words. But Michael stood before he could reply. He could feel the family's eyes still on him, their gratitude pressing against the weight he carried inside. For once, the ledger in his head, the endless tally of his failures, felt as though a single mark had been added to the other side. Small, maybe, but undeniable. As the officers led the robbers out into the storm, Michael stood near the shattered window, rain misting against his face. His hands still shook faintly, but inside there was something steadier than fear, steadier than regret. A seed, fragile, but real. He glanced back at the family. The mother gave him a small, trembling smile. The children, still clinging to her, offered shy, watery nods. For the first time in years, Michael let himself breathe fully. The storm outside raged on, but inside him, something had shifted. The cafe was quieter now, though the echoes of fear still lingered in the air. The police had taken the robbers away, their wet footprints disappearing into the storm outside. Most of the patrons had already slipped into the night, shaken but eager to leave the scene behind. Only the family remained, huddled together near the corner booth, their belongings scattered, but their relief palpable. Michael stood a few steps away, uncertain. His hands still bore the faint tremor of adrenaline, his body reminding him that the danger had been real, that it could have ended so differently. He flexed his fingers, trying to shake it off. But the shiver wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, a gnawing awareness that, for the first time in years, his instinct had been to step forward, not back. He hadn't expected to stay once the police arrived. Old habits screamed at him to vanish into the rain, to avoid questions, avoid notice. But something rooted him there. Something in the way the mother had looked at him. Her voice firm when she told the officers he was the one who had saved them. He had grown so used to people's suspicion, to wary glances and judgmental stares, that the sight of someone seeing him as more than his scars left him off balance. The waitress approached timidly, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was pale, her eyes still wide from shock. "They said you should sit down. Wait until detectives come," she murmured. Then, after a pause, "I've never seen anything like that. What you did, it was brave, brave." The word hit him like an ache in his chest. Once, long ago, he had worn it as a title, part of the uniform, part of the stories people told when they thanked him for his service. But somewhere along the way, it had twisted, soured. Cowardice had chased it away, left him with nothing but shame. To hear it again now, from a stranger, felt like a foreign language. He gave her a small nod, unable to answer. The children had stopped crying. The little boy peeked at Michael from behind his mother's arm, curiosity flickering in his eyes. The girl, slightly older, clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest, its fur damp with tears. Michael caught the boy's gaze and, without meaning to, offered the faintest of smiles. To his surprise, the boy didn't look away. Instead, he tilted his head, as if trying to puzzle out the man who had turned the tide in their darkest moment. "Mom," the boy whispered loudly enough to carry across the room. "Is he a hero?" Michael froze. The mother's eyes softened, but she didn't look away from her son. "He's the reason we're safe," she said gently. "That's what matters." The word hung in the air again, hero, but she had tempered it, wrapped it in something quieter, more grounded. Safe. Not glorious. Not larger than life. Just safe. Michael looked away, his throat tightening. He didn't deserve the label, not after everything. But for a moment, he let the sound of it wash over him. Maybe it wasn't about labels at all. Maybe it was about what he had chosen tonight. In the split second when it mattered, he sank into a chair near the window, staring out at the storm. Rain streaked the glass in crooked lines, and the neon light of a distant sign bled through the water like a wound healing slowly. His reflection stared back at him. Tired eyes, graying hair. Scars that told stories no one wanted to hear. For years he had avoided mirrors, avoided confronting the man who looked back. But now, sitting in that dim cafe, with exhaustion, but his mind refused rest. He replayed the night over and over, the gun, the fear in the children's eyes, the way his hands had moved almost without thought. He should have felt relief that it was over, that no one had been hurt. But the familiar shadows crept back in, the shadows of what he hadn't done long ago. For years, his memory of that night in the desert had been like a wound he couldn't stop picking. The firefight, the dust, the sound of someone shouting his name, and his body refusing to move, his legs leaden with fear while his brothers in arms charged forward. By the time he gathered the courage, it was too late. One was down, another bleeding out. His commanding officer's eyes had found him, not with anger, but with disappointment, a weight heavier than any bullet. He had carried that look with him ever since, a ghost that followed him into every mirror, every darkened room. Tonight, when he stepped into the path of the robber's gun, for the briefest moment, he felt he had outrun that ghost. But out here, alone again, it caught up quickly. A car passed slowly on the opposite street, its headlights cutting through the rain. Michael instinctively moved into the shadows, old instincts guiding him to avoid attention. He hated that reflex, hated the way he shrank even now. He wanted to believe the man in the cafe was the real him, but doubt whispered otherwise. He turned down an alley shortcut, the walls dripping with water, trash bags piled in soggy heaps. The smell was sharp, metallic, like rust and old rain. Halfway through, he paused. A noise carried faintly through the storm. Not the rumble of thunder or the groan of pipes, but something softer. A voice. He held still, straining to hear. There it was again. A muffled sob, followed by a choked cry. Michael's gut tightened. He stepped carefully, his boots quiet against the slick pavement, until he reached the far corner. There, huddled beneath a fire escape, was a boy no older than 12. His hoodie was soaked through, his sneakers caked with mud. He clutched a small backpack to his chest, like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. Michael's first instinct was to walk on. Not his problem. Too many times, stepping into someone else's world had left him burned. But something stopped him. The way the boy shivered. The way his shoulders shook with each suppressed sob. The memory of the family's children in the cafe, eyes wide with fear. "Hey," Michael said quietly. The boy jerked his head up, eyes wide, ready to bolt. Michael held up his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "It's all right. I'm not here to bother you." The boy sniffled, retreating further into the shadows. "Go away." Michael crouched slightly, careful to keep his distance. "Looks like you've been out here a while. You hungry?" No answer. Just the sound of rain dripping from the fire escape onto the pavement. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the sandwich the waitress had shoved into his hands before he left. He unwrapped it halfway, the smell of ham and cheese cutting through the damp air, and placed it gently on the ground between them. "You don't have to take it," he said. "But it's yours if you want." He stood slowly, backing away a step, giving the boy space. The child eyed him warily, then the sandwich. His hunger betrayed him. Within moments, trembling fingers reached out and snatched it. He tore into it like someone who hadn't eaten in days. Michael watched, something stirring in his chest. He recognized that look desperation mixed with pride, the kind that made asking for help impossible. He had worn that look himself more times than he cared to remember. "What's your name?" Michael asked gently. The boy chewed quickly, swallowed, then muttered. Michael nodded. "Eli. That's a strong name." The boy glanced up briefly, suspicion still etched into his young face. "Who are you?" Michael hesitated. He could have lied, given some false name and walked away after. against the tiled floor. The heat hit him immediately, and his shoulders sagged with relief. He slid onto a plastic chair against the wall, hugging his backpack tighter, while Michael dropped a few coins into a dryer and held his jacket in front of the vent. Warm air billowed out, filling the space with a faint smell of detergent and fabric softener. They sat in silence for several minutes, the rhythm of the machines the only sound between them. Michael watched Eli out of the corner of his eye. The boy's face was sharp but young, cheeks hollowed slightly from missed meals. His eyes were wary, darting to the door as if he expected someone to barge in at any moment. "You live around here?" Michael asked finally. Eli's gaze flicked to him, then away. Sometimes, Michael didn't push. He recognized the careful dodge. Instead, he leaned back, stretching his legs, trying to seem at ease. "I used to come here when I couldn't sleep," he said. "Something about the machines. That steady sound makes you feel less alone." 10. Eli glanced at him again, uncertain. "Why couldn't you sleep?" The question caught Michael off guard. He hadn't expected the boy to care, let alone ask. He exhaled slowly, eyes on the spinning clothes. "Memories," he said. "The kind that don't go away, no matter how much you want them to. There is 1-5. There is 1-4. The Mose, the Mose, the Mose. There is 1-4. Eli didn't reply right away. He pulled at the frayed strap of his backpack, then muttered, "I know what that's like." Michael turned his head slightly, studying him. There was more behind those words, but the boy wasn't ready to spill it. Still, it was a crack in the armor, and Michael understood the weight of even that much admission. "You got anyone waiting for you?" Michael asked carefully. Eli shook his head. "Not really." "Not really," Michael nodded. He didn't ask about parents, about why a kid was alone in the rain at night. Some truths needed time to surface. Instead, he pulled a small pack of crackers from his pocket, the kind the cafe waitress had shoved in with the sandwich earlier. He slid it across the bench toward Eli. The boy eyed it, suspicious, then opened the wrapper and ate quickly, crumbs scattering on his lap. Michael pretended not to notice, staring at the machines, giving the boy the dignity of not being watched while he ate. The storm outside raged on, the rain hammering the roof, but inside the laundromat, it felt oddly safe. Michael leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He should have felt restless, but instead, a strange calm settled over him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was thinking about what sat just a few feet away. A scared kid with sharp eyes and a too big backpack, who for some reason hadn't bolted yet. After a while, Eli spoke again, his voice quieter. "Why did you stop? In the alley? Why did you talk to me instead of just walking on?" Michael opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling for a moment before answering. "Because I've walked away too many times, and every time I regret it." Eli studied him, chewing slowly, as though measuring the truth of his words. Finally, he nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if granting Michael a sliver of trust. Michael didn't push it further. Trust wasn't earned in grand gestures, it was built piece by piece, in small acts of showing up. Tonight, in a dingy laundromat, listening to the hum of machines and the storm outside, the first piece had been laid. The storm outside finally began to thin, the hammering of rain softening into a drizzle. The laundromat's hum grew louder in the absence of thunder, the steady thrum of dryers filling the silence. Michael checked his watch, nearly midnight. He shifted in his chair, weighing what came next. Eli had dozed off against the wall, his backpack clutched tight in both arms, his head tilting with each breath. For the first time, The boy's face looked peaceful. Michael depending on him. That weight, the fragile trust of a child, snapped the chain that had held him for years. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. His eyes locked on the scarred man's, unwavering. "Or you'll regret testing me." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The men exchanged a glance. They had expected weakness. They had smelled fear. What they found instead was something steadier, harder. A man who looked like he had nothing left to lose, and yet something worth defending right in front of him. The scarred man clicked his tongue, feigning disappointment. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered. He nudged his partner toward the door. "Come on." The bell jingled again as they slipped back into the wet night. Michael didn't relax until their footsteps faded down the street. Only then did he exhale, his hands trembling slightly. He sat back down, running a hand over his face. His body still hummed with adrenaline, but beneath it was something else. A fierce, quiet relief. Eli's eyes were wide, his voice small. "They were going to take me." Michael met his gaze, steady. "Not while I'm here." The boy swallowed hard, then whispered, "You didn't run." The words hit Michael like a knife and a balm at once. He felt his throat tighten, the memory of sand and gunfire and his own cowardice rising. But tonight, Eli was right. He hadn't run. Outside, The storm had passed. A thin beam of moonlight broke through the clouds, shining faintly through the laundromat's streaked windows. For the first time in years, Michael felt as if he had taken a step out of the shadows. The laundromat sat quiet now, its humming machines the only reminder of how close the night had come to collapsing into tragedy. Michael leaned against the hard plastic chair, still feeling the phantom tension in his shoulders, the phantom fear trying to claw back into his chest. But this time, he had faced it. This time, he hadn't let fear win. Eli shifted beside him, rubbing his tired eyes. "Are they gone?" he asked, voice fragile. Michael nodded. "They're gone. They won't be back tonight." The boy let out a shaky breath, hugging his backpack closer. He looked up at Michael, his face still pale, but something in his eyes had shifted. Trust, pure, unguarded trust, had rooted itself there. "You stayed," Eli said simply, the words carrying more weight than Michael knew how to bear. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. "I told you I would." Outside, the storm had completely cleared. The pavement glistened under the streetlights, and a few cars splashed through the shallow puddles. The world looked washed clean, as if even the night itself had exhaled. Michael checked the clock again just past 1 in the morning. Morning buses would start rolling soon. "We'll get you home," Michael said softly. "Your mum's probably worried sick." Eli hesitated. Michael's chest ached. He recognized that fear, the fear of disappointing someone, of not living up to their expectations. He leaned forward, making sure Eli heard him clearly. "She won't be mad. She'll be grateful you're safe. Parents, they just want to know their kids are okay." The boy nodded slowly, processing his words. For the first time that night, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Minutes stretched into an hour, each drier cycle ticking them closer to dawn. Finally, the rumble of a city bus echoed outside. Its headlights swept across the laundromat windows. Michael stood and placed a steadying hand on Eli's shoulder. "Come on," he said. "Time to go." The bus driver, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes, raised her eyebrows when she saw them climb aboard. "Late night for you two." Michael gave a half smile. "Long story." They sat near the front, the bus nearly empty at this hour. Eli leaned against the window, his head drooping as the gentle motion lulled him towards sleep again. Michael watched the darkened streets roll by the corner stores shuttered, the neon signs flickering. Michael nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He stepped back, gave one final look at the reunited pair, and walked into the early dawn. The city was quiet, washed clean from the storm. For the first time in years, Michael felt lighter, as if he had finally set down the burden he had carried across deserts, through sleepless nights, and into his empty apartment. He had faced fear and chosen differently. As the sun's first rays touched the horizon, Michael allowed himself a rare smile. The world still carried shadows, but tonight had proved that even in those shadows, light could be found. Sometimes in the most unexpected places, sometimes in the most unexpected people, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself believe he could be one of them. Sometimes, it takes just one act of courage to rewrite an entire life. Do you think redemption is earned through actions or through time? Leave us a comment with your thoughts below. Make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you'll always be the first to see our next story. Until then, stay hopeful.